Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today my guest is Richard Barrett. Hi Richard.
Hello.
And we're going to talk about consciousness and business and leadership in business with awareness. It's going to be fascinating because we're also going to include part of Richard's process as well, how he's got to where he has. And he's a great book writer and he's written 4 books so far. The first one is Spiritual Unfoldment, A Guide to Liberating Your Soul, Liberating the Corporate Soul, Building a Values-Driven Organisation, and his latest book, The New Leadership Paradigm, which we're going to focus on quite a lot. So, Richard, I spoke to you on the phone yesterday just to get a bit of personal information, and it seems your life has always been in some kind of flow. So often on Conscious TV, people come and they've had these dark periods and they've learnt from that and done workshops and everything, but you seem to have quite an even journey so far.
That's true. I mean, I've had my ups and downs, and which were all opportunities to learn lessons, if you like. But I consider myself to be an extremely fortunate person to have been able to explore my spirituality at the beginning, and then what I later realized was exploring my consciousness and what consciousness was about.
Because you're originally in transportation, then you realised you should be in transformation, not transportation.
When I was 18, I had the opportunity to go to university, and I went and did civil engineering and then transportation engineering, and I thought, wow, this is a great career, and I spent 20 years doing that. I finished up at the World Bank advising governments on transportation, and all of a sudden in 1990 I was totally bored with my career, and I thought, what have I been studying for the past 20 years? And it was the complete works of Carl Jung, God and physics, spirituality, Eastern philosophy, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm not reading much on engineering these days, or throughout that period. And I realized it was about transformation. And then I realized that I somehow had become dyslexic at 18, and I thought the word was transportation, and actually it was transformation.
So what was drawing you to these books? Was it something automatically happening, do you think?
I cannot explain it. It was, I can now. At the time I couldn't. Yeah. It was the inclination of my soul preparing me, I think, for this latter part of my life when I could fully give my gift. And it was a way of getting me ready for this period now.
And what is this period now?
Wow, that's a big question. Yeah. So I have to really then start, well, where am I at this moment? Yeah. And from a personal point of view, I'm at a place where I recognize that I'm the servant of my soul. That the me that existed in an ego-driven capacity, and I remember that when I was like 22, 23, 24, has gone. And so in a sense there's a...
Okay, that's a big statement to make. Let's have a look at that. So when you say the me has gone, what does that mean in a tangible way?
Well, I can, I think the best way I can relate to it is relate it to psychology. The aspect of me which is my ego, which thinks that it lives in a physical world, in a zero-sum game, and is willing to get into competition to get its needs met, has gone. It no longer exists inside me.
And was this a gradual process that happened?
Totally gradual process. I was one of the biggest achievers when I was in my 20s. I was sent to Paris to open up a big office for an engineering company, and I was as competitive as the rest of them.
And so why did it go? Was it because you were reading all these books? Was it a series of realizations? Was it a natural process?
I think it was, as I look back now, it was a natural process, first of all, of what I would call individuation, which is the phase that we go through when we begin to let go of our cultural conditioning and the conditioning that we have up to the age of 7, when our young minds haven't really developed cognitive abilities, but are operating at an emotional level. And during that period, 1 to 7, we learn to interpret the world through our beliefs and to maximize pleasure and minimize pain. And those subconscious beliefs stay with us for the rest of our lives. And many of these beliefs are fear-based beliefs. And so what I've been gradually doing is letting go of these fear-based beliefs so that I simply trust the universe to provide for me. In fact, what I really do is I just trust my soul to provide for me. So It's been a gradual process to the point where I realized just a few years ago that actually I have no needs. And because as soon as I have a need, life is not perfect. And therefore, if it's not perfect, I start getting into fear about making it perfect. What do I need in order to make it perfect? And I decided to let go of all of that. And so that there would never be any fear in me, because I realized that fear was blocking my soul from coming through and living its passion. And so now I'm just the servant of my soul, and I get told what to do. I mean, it sounds funny, but for me, it's really simple. I call it inspiration. I get the idea, like this book, The New Leadership Paradigm. Yeah. 3 or 4 years ago, when I got the idea to write The New Leadership Paradigm, I totally resisted the idea. And I thought, wow, why would I want to write a book on leadership? Because if you go to Amazon, I did, and I typed leadership, there are 300,000 titles. And then I thought, oh, well, let me type leadership and values, and then leadership, values, and culture, and then leadership, values, culture, and consciousness. By this time, there were only 8 books. I thought, oh, that's interesting. Only 8 books. Maybe I should write a book on leadership.
Found a niche. Yeah.
And then I did one other thing. 14 years ago, I developed this methodology for measuring consciousness by mapping values for individuals and organizations. It's now used all over the world. And I thought, well, so who are the leaders who are writing about leadership? What are they writing about? I thought, well, let me read Jack Welch, Donald Trump, all of these people who are acknowledged as leaders. And what I realized was when I analyzed their books, I found that the values that came through in their books did not map to this concept I have of the 7 levels of consciousness. They mapped partially, but nobody was writing about leadership from the full 7 levels of consciousness, from the full aspect of who we are. And so I thought, that's my niche. I'm going to write about leadership from the full 7 levels of consciousness.
Okay, so what are these levels of consciousness, these 7 levels?
So basically, these levels of consciousness relate to our existential reality. And it's very interesting because we move through these states of consciousness naturally from when we are born through the process of aging. But in the upper levels, which are, shall I say, have a spiritual context, not everybody reaches those levels. But they're there because there are plenty of people who demonstrate those levels. So it basically starts with survival. When the baby is born, it has instincts and knows how to survive. It knows how to smile, it knows how to suckle, it knows how to get its needs met. And then as the baby grows, it begins to realize that it's important to conform and belong in relationships because that's how it's going to stay safe and survive. And so relationships become very important. That's the 2nd level of consciousness. And then once the baby has, or the young child has got to, say, shall we say, 7 or 8 years old, it begins to want to differentiate itself from its siblings and others. And so it begins to look for areas where it excels so that it can build its own sense of self-esteem. So now we're into the 3rd level of conscious, self-esteem consciousness. And each one of these phases that we go through, our consciousness, what we're aware of and the opportunities that we seek from the world is focused on these different needs: survival, relationship, self-esteem. And that sounds a bit like Maslow, and it is, in fact. I was very inspired by Maslow's work, but what I realized was that you could actually convert needs into consciousness, because during these first 3 levels of consciousness, if you had bad experiences in that early childhood experience, you learnt fear-based beliefs about I don't have enough. That has to do with survival. I'm not loved enough. That has to do with relationships. And I'm not enough. That has to do with self-esteem. And we all have these subconscious fear-based beliefs that we earn during that period. But later on in life, they become dysfunctional. And so to move to the next level, which is the level of transformation, basically you have to find ways of letting go of these subconscious beliefs that are now inhibiting you as an adult.
But there has to be an awareness, doesn't there, that you need to let go.
Yes.
And most people, I would say, business leaders, well, maybe not fair to say most people, but a lot of business leaders, from what you say, they're pretty much stuck at level 2 or level 3.
Well, yeah, they're not obviously sometimes not very good at level 2, but they're stuck really at. Well, actually, you're right. They're stuck at all 3 levels.
A lot of it's
Yeah,
very ego-driven.
yeah. There's a lot of status driven about self-esteem, and there's a lot of I don't have enough. I mean, Enron was a fantastic example of the leaders of Enron. I don't have enough. Enough was never enough, and so we're going to break all the rules, and we don't care because enough is never enough. And so, so what happens is this very interesting because. So we're up to level 3. We're getting to level 4, which is transformation, right. Which is an understanding that who I am as a leader actually impacts the organizational culture, because the culture of an organization is a reflection of the leader's consciousness and the leadership team's consciousness. And so when the business isn't doing very well and continues not to do very well, you can trace it back to the leader. And the bureaucratic way of being, the hierarchical way of being, micromanagement, all of this impacts employees and they don't really want to be there. And so what happens next is that when you get to that transformation level, you begin to realize that who you are in the world is actually impacting your experience of the world. And these subconscious fear-based beliefs are actually inhibiting you from becoming all you can become.
Yeah, so when you're leading a business, a CEO, an MD or whatever, it means that really your consciousness is dictating how the business is run and where the business is going.
Absolutely is dictating. And it's what happens in the culture of the organization is a direct reflection of who you are and how you're showing up, and which levels of consciousness you've mastered and where you're stuck.
And how many business leaders do you think are aware of this?
Oh, very few.
But this is fundamental, isn't it?
Absolutely. So, we're talking about the model, but actually, we developed tools from this model to actually measure this. Not just these first 3 levels and the transformation level, but the upper levels of finding meaning. Level 5, that's internal cohesion.
Yes, yeah.
Level 6, making a difference in the world, and level 7, service. So we're able to measure consciousness by mapping values of individuals and of organizations. So when we do that and feed those results back, the leader begins to realize that the culture is a reflection of his or her own consciousness.
So you actually go into your team, they go into a business, you talk to different people there from the top down to the bottom, presumably, you get the feedback, and then you're able to construct a map.
Actually, it's even more simple than that, because doing it that way, there's a chance that we could influence the outcome through our own consciousness. So actually, we don't do that. We just ask 3 questions and all employees go online and answer these 3 questions. And the first question is, which of the following values and behaviors most represent who you are as a person? Okay. And you pick 10 values from a customized list, and then about 80 words. And then the next question is, which of the following values and behaviors most represent how your organization operates? Again, you pick 10 words from a list of about 80 or 90, which have been customized for the organization. And the third question is, which of the following value behaviors most represent a high-performance organization, or how you would like your organization to be? So we collect all of this data. Now, in the question about, in all of the questions actually, but particularly in the current culture question, how is your organization operating, there are positive words and potentially limiting words like bureaucracy, hierarchy, internal competition, blame, manipulation, as well as positive words. And so what we're able to do is to find out the proportion of votes from employees for these positive words and these potentially limiting words. And the proportion of votes for these potentially limiting words we call cultural entropy. It's the degree of dysfunction in the system. It's energy which isn't available for useful work because it takes a lot of energy to do bureaucracy and internal competition and blame. Yeah. And so this measure of cultural entropy enables us then to say, aha, you're a high entropy organization. Look at the leaders. We can do a similar assessment where the leader goes online and picks 10 values about how he or she thinks they operate. And then he or she asks 15 people to pick 10 values about how he or she operates also. And we map. And if they're picking limiting values again, here we measure personal entropy. And what we found, of course, is that leaders with high personal entropy create cultures with high cultural entropy. And leaders with low personal entropy create cultures with low cultural entropy. And we've also found there's a direct correlation between entropy and performance and staff engagement. So high entropy, a lot of dysfunction, low staff engagement, low performance. And the converse is true.
And how open do you find the bosses, the leaders of business, when this survey, investigation has been done?
Well, this varies.
It could be a shock for them, couldn't
it? It is. Often it varies. There are some leaders who think this would be great to be able to have this measure because it's a really unique measure. And by doing this every year, we can really change our organization. But sometimes when they get the feedback and they see the high level of entropy and they begin to realize it's about them and their leadership team, they begin to get cold feet. And that happens. But for the leaders who say, okay, this is just feedback and we can do something with this data, then what we see is amazing transformation. They measure year after year. And as they do, the values change. We see the current culture, top 10 values, moving up the evolution of the 7 levels of consciousness. And it becomes an amazing pathway to progress.
And if you look at how the world of business is changing, everything is moving so fast now. And you have, MySpace is the big thing, then suddenly it's worth almost nothing, and Facebook's the big thing, and who knows what's the big thing after that. And unless you're staying ahead of the game, you're in trouble in business, aren't you?
Absolutely. And so this leads me, into the new leadership paradigm, because what I realized is that the fundamental value that has been through 14 billion years of evolution is adaptability. And it is so important now in business, adaptability, because everything's moving so fast.
Because you talk in your book about you studied the species that had survived, didn't you?
Exactly. So not only adaptability, but continuous learning. So when you look at the evolution through the years, you find 5 values showing up which are absolutely fundamental for Homo sapiens, for us, to take on board if we want to be successful. The first is adaptability. The second is continuous learning. The next is the ability to bond. The next is the ability to cooperate. And the last one is the ability to be at ease with uncertainty. These 5 characteristics are essential for human progress. And what I also found was as I looked at the patterns of evolution, I looked at the atomic level, the cellular level, chemistry too, I found there's a pattern to evolution. And the pattern is this. First of all, an entity, be it an atom, a cell, a giraffe, a tortoise, or a human being or a nation, has to become viable and independent in its framework of existence. As the framework conditions become more difficult and more competitive, then the only way to survive is to bond together to form a group structure. Atoms form molecules, cells form organisms. And then as framework conditions become more difficult and threatening, in order to increase resilience, these group structures then cooperate with each other to create a higher order entity. And this pattern is throughout the whole of evolution, at the atomic plane, at the cellular plane, and now at the plane of creatures in Homo sapiens. And so what this says is, if you really want to be successful in the world, in business, you have to learn how to make your employees viable and independent. In other words, give them a voice so that they can tell you what's going on, bond them together in group structures called teams or business units, and then have these teams or business units cooperate with each other to create that higher order entity called the organization. And you can take it to a different level. You can say, wow, well, what about social evolution? Well, we have to form nations where individuals can become viable and independent. In other words, self-actualize, individuate and self-actualize, bond together to form a group structure called the nation, and nations have to learn to cooperate with each other to create the next higher order entity, which is humanity. And that's where we are right now.
So that I becomes more and more we.
Absolutely.
At all these levels.
I becomes we. Self-interest shifts into the common good. And as I say in business, stop being the best in the world and start being the best for the world. Because the businesses that don't get that will crash. Because we're reaching a place now where the problems of existence are global. But the systems and structures we have for dealing with them are national. And so we have to get our nations to think like this too, to shift from I to we. But you know, I'm wondering if actually business, although it's seen very often as the culprit, may be the savior. Because I hate to say this on TV, but business leaders are often more intelligent than political leaders.
I think there's no doubt.
Yeah, well, and so what happens is they get the idea that we have to bring together these different elements of society, which we've divided. We've got government, we've got civil society, and we've got business. We need to bring them together because the individuals concerned, you know, they may work in the different sectors, but they're all individuals in society. And we're not going to solve our problems of existence unless we all come together and work it through. And that is beginning to happen in business. It really, truly is. I'm amazed at what's beginning to happen. You know, unfortunately, you know, the news media don't give you the good news. They only give you the bad news. But there is a lot of good news out there.
Yeah, this whole thing of cooperation, like my basic business is the music business. I've been in for many, many years, and that's how I earn my money. And when it comes down to it, I have some great friends who are running direct competitive companies, and we meet together for dinner, we exchange ideas, and it's a meeting of friends, and it's somehow an expansion comes out of that. And it's not that we go into the dinner or a meeting with awareness, or we can't tell them this, we can't tell them that. Pretty much things are on the table.
Right.
And I think that, I know that's worked for me and my business, and it may be the music business is a little bit more kind of, not special so much, but it's more forward thinking than other businesses. But that has to be the way forward. But it does mean that you have to have a certain intelligence, and you have to have a certain courage, because you are revealing things, and you are always looking forward. And the reason why I like meeting with these other people is that I give them ideas, they give me ideas, and we brainstorm, we come up with things. What can we do together? How can it help all of us, if you like, right, either individually or collectively? And it's interesting, because one of the things that I've had discussions about recently with many different people is, where are the new world leaders? Because you have to have extraordinary qualities now to be a world leader.
Absolutely. So, I mean, it comes back to the bonding and the cooperation. And that, you know, being able to bond to form a team is a level 5 consciousness level. Level 6 is being able to then to cooperate with others. And that's exactly what you're talking about. It's about forming strategic alliances. And so that is where we need to be. And so what I'm saying in the New Leadership Paradigm book is that, you know, business leaders in particular sectors need to get together and agree what would be a sustainable future for our sector, agree the rules about what would be a sustainable future, and compete within those rules. In other words, stop having a free-for-all, but agree the rules of the game so that we can all create a sustainable future. And there are business leaders beginning to do that, particularly in the areas of emergency services. I was listening to a leader the other day talking about how some of these transport companies like DHL and TNT, etc., are actually meeting regularly to coordinate and work together on how they deal with disasters like Haiti, earthquake, etc., etc. And they're actually cooperating at that level. The next thing is they will move to a higher level of cooperation. All of these types of organizations have their own fleets of vehicles in every town. What if they only had one fleet of vehicles and shared them? They would cut down carbon emissions. There's a lot of good thinking going on, I think, now in business around how do we make sustainability key, not just to our particular business, but within the sector that we're operating in.
And how do you encourage people to be more aware? Because it seems to me the more you know yourself, the more you are aware, and you even say one line in your book that you are aware that you are aware. How do we encourage that with people? Because that's pretty deep stuff, yet it's essential for the planet.
So what you're really just saying is, how do we make people aware of the evolution of consciousness, and how do we make them aware that moving through those steps up to the higher levels of consciousness is actually not only good for them, but it's good for their business? Well, the way we do it is really simple. We measure where they are right now. And when we see the current culture with all the top 10 values showing up as dots at level 1, 2, 3, and 4, and nothing at 5, 6, and 7, the business leaders go, that's interesting. We don't seem to have any internal cohesion at level 5. We don't seem to have any values that are around making a difference at level 6. And we certainly got nothing at level 7 is about looking after humanity and the planet. What are we going to do about it? And so they buy into the idea that consciousness is evolutionary in nature. See, unfortunately, science tends to regard consciousness as flatland.
No, I understand that.
But it's not flatland. Yeah. And once the business leaders start measuring, then business leaders are really good at performing. And when they have a measurement and they want to improve that measurement, they go for it. Yeah. And so what we're providing is a way of measuring the intangibles. You see, they have so many tangibles like, profits, efficiency, etc., etc.
Market share and profit. Market share,
etc. But they don't have any measurement of the what we call the lead indicators and the intangibles. And the values assessment we do provides them with that. It's a lead indicator of their success, and it's also a measure of who they are as leaders.
Who they are as leaders.
Yeah.
You see, the great leaders, whether they be in business or politics or even religion, they've always had courage.
And courage is a level 4 value. And why is it at level 4? Because it comes after we've met all these tried to meet all these deficiency needs about not having enough, not being loved, and not being enough. It takes courage to work on yourself to let go of those fears, because it's scary. Yeah. And that's why some business leaders do the assessment and then run away, because it's too scary. They don't have the courage to look inside and say, well, this is me.
Yes.
And that courage is fundamentally important for individuation and transformation.
But looking inside and finding out what me is a lot more than just understanding how your business works. It's understanding your own psychological process, Absolutely. Maybe a emerging spiritual process. Absolutely. That is a deep commitment.
It is. And yet, you see, fundamentally, what's happening in the world right now, we're allowing our souls into our lives. And that happens at that level 4 consciousness. Because we think we're this ego living in this physical world, but in reality, we're a soul with a body living in this physical world. And once we can get past those fears of the ego and they fall away, the soul emerges. And the soul wants you, me, everyone to find meaning in their lives.
And how would you define the soul?
I see the soul. I have to get into quantum mechanics a little bit to explain this, because Einstein said that it's a fact of life that everything is energy. And so for me, there was a big bang 14 billion years ago. The world was filled with energy, and then forms individuated out of that energy. And you and me and every other human individual is an individuated aspect of that energy field living in the quantum reality of existence. And when we come into this physical world, thanks to the soul wanting to be in the physical world. And so when, people often ask, well, where does the will to survive come from? Well, actually, for me, the will to survive is simply the will of the soul to be in the physical reality. And so once we're into that physical reality, we find ourselves in a physical body, and we find ourselves with all these different senses of awareness, and we do the best to be in that physical reality. And we learn from our parents and the culture we're brought up into how to manipulate that reality so that we can maximize pleasure and minimize pain. But it's in the physical reality. And we've forgotten that we're actually souls having human experience. We've completely forgotten that. And then, as we begin to let go of those fears that we've developed because we think we live in this physical reality, the soul comes through, and it comes through in two ways. One, it comes through in the way of wanting to enable you to release your fears so that you can create a more open space for the soul to come through. And the soul also wants to give its gift, whatever it's passionate about. When I meet people, the first question I ask them is, what are you passionate about? I met a fellow the other day. He says, I'm passionate about authenticity. Oh, I said, so your soul is here to learn about authenticity. And he was so shocked. And he realized at that moment that was his journey. But he thought he was helping companies to build authentic companies. He didn't realize that it was about his own journey. And so that's the soul. And so what I've come to realize is that I am my soul, and then the more I surrender to my soul, the more beautiful my life becomes, because I have no needs. Everything happens. Synchronicity rains down on me, because at a higher level of consciousness, beyond physical awareness, in the quantum reality, the soul is just making connections because everything's connected to that. And all of this stuff is showing up in my life, which I don't know how it happened. It's called synchronicity. And it's all furthering my work and who I am and what I came to do as a soul. And I believe that's true for everybody if they're able to tap into that. And I think many people are tapping into it. We're at a stage right now in the world where people are wanting to tap into that. And so, but as you do, it's almost as if life becomes really easy because everything's kind of almost arranged for you at another level. And openings come and it's like, wow, how did that happen? Because I surrendered to my soul.
You have a whole section in the book about staying in the flow and how important this is for leadership.
Yeah, staying in the flow. Practical ways of staying in the flow. I don't think you...
So what's some examples of practical ways of staying in the flow?
Well, there are many. I think like 11 or 12 in the book. But, there are some very simple things. Don't take yourself too seriously. It can be right at the very beginning. Recognize that whatever's happening in front of you is a neutral experience, and you're giving it all the meaning it has for you. When you're getting angry and upset, it's not really the other person who's making you angry or upset. It's your belief about the situation that is making you angry or upset. When you get stressed, it's not the situation that's stressing you. It's your belief about the situation.
You react to it,
it's like the belief that you won't be able to cope, and if you can't cope, what will happen? And all the fear's kicking, and that's the stress. So you're really, really, in many ways, in charge of your reality, of what you're actually feeling and your emotional response to the world. And so in the book, I talk about how do you master that? And one of the ways to master that is to recognize that you can be your own self-witness. And so if there's something happening which is taking you out of alignment, you're feeling uncomfortable, what I say is step into the balcony and look what's happening on the dance floor of your life. In other words, you move into the soul perspective and you look at yourself. And because we're self-aware, this is what we can do as human beings. And when you move into that, you begin to say, Richard, I just noticed you were really getting upset about that. What's the fear? What's the need that you think you have, which is causing you to feel that way? And I begin to analyze what fears are showing up for me and how I can release those fears and move back into the flow.
And it shows you another level of who you really are.
Yeah.
Because it shows you you're not the one
that's
being involved with the drama.
Yeah.
Because you can watch yourself getting involved in the
exactly.
drama.
That's it. It's a little trick of being able to begin to realize that there are different aspects, and one of the aspects is the soul. And once you step into the balcony, then you begin to see the ego and its machinations and what's going on in the world and what you create, the reality you're creating, and you could create something else.
And that's the key, isn't
That's
it?
the key.
You can create something else, or you can allow the flow to come through you.
Yeah.
To create the creation.
Yeah.
Because going right at the beginning, we talked about the I becoming the we. It isn't so much that we're doing something. It's like we're like a vehicle for something happening through us.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I'm just a vehicle for my soul to come through and do amazing things in the world. Now, one of the reasons I wrote the New Leadership Paradigm is that I realized that two things. One, leadership development is extremely expensive in business because what they do is they put the top people through a 50, 60, 70,000 pounds or dollars program in order to become leaders. And they mostly neglect the rest of the employees. You don't really get a chance to get into a leadership development program until you're well up in the organization. And so leadership development is really for the elites. Also, rich families send their children to business school, and incidentally, business schools don't really do a good job at teaching leadership. They teach business, they don't really teach leadership. So this whole idea of leadership is a privilege of the elites. And I said to myself, you know what, I've got to stop that. What I want to do is create a leadership development system that is democratized. It's available for everybody on the planet. So along with this book is a website, and there's even more on the website than in the book. And there are downloadable learning modules, which cost very little, that you can learn how to lead yourself. 43 exercises that you can do to help you move through these 7 stages of evolution, and the 3 universal stages of evolution, the 7 levels of consciousness. So you can download those and work on them. And then there's another series of 30-some exercises for leading a team and leading an organization and leading in society. And the whole thing is so for less than, say, £60, you can have a leadership development program for all the staff in your organization. And £60 a person, I mean. But it's democratized leadership development, and so that anybody on the planet can actually make use of this. When I wrote this, I was thinking of like a graduate in Kenya, just left school, got a job, has no possibility of doing a leadership development program. How can I make that happen? And the whole system's a wiki system. In other words, the users give feedback about the website and the learning modules, the 4 learning modules, and then we reintegrate their comments back into the website and the learning modules. So it becomes, if you like, a universal leadership learning system that everybody can participate in.
Interesting. I was just looking at my notes as you were talking, and I just saw the words, follow your passion. And I listened to you. Here's someone that's really following their passion.
Totally following my passion. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And the more I follow it, the more fulfilled I feel.
Yeah. We were talking before we just started recording about, it's interesting how some of the richest people in the world, the Bill Gates and the Paul Allens, the Warren Buffett, etc., they're getting together now. Another example of people getting together.
The 6 consciousness happening.
And they're giving back. They're starting to give back. And I think the Bill and Melinda Gates charity is the biggest one in the world. And it does a lot of wonderful things. We can still maybe question Bill Gates as a businessman, but there's an effort to put something back. And that seems to me a very positive step on a certain level, that people who have all this money are realizing that in itself, the money isn't everything. And I read a biography 2 or 3 years ago about Warren Buffett, and it's quite very moving at the end, because apparently he was doing this lecture tour of American universities, and people were asking him, what's the most important thing for you? How did you raise all this money? And asked about his success, and he says consistently now, apparently, the most important thing for me is that the people that I love me. It's not about the money at all. Now you can say he's got all the money he needs, and of course he has. But the great thing is there's a looking beyond having that money. And that seems to be, in its own way, happening now in terms of super rich people. They're looking beyond to just having the money, just having the power.
Yeah. And you know, what they're actually looking for is authentic love. Because when you have a lot of money and when you have a lot of power, people will come to you and be attracted to you. And it's very difficult to know whether these people are attractive because of your money or whether they're attracted because of authentic love. And that's what they're seeking. They're seeking authentic love.
Yes. Yeah, the other thing that's interesting that I read recently was it was about Steve Jobs and the Apple organization and how he saw communication as so important. And apparently the last, I don't know when this was exactly, but when they bought a series of buildings to convert into an Apple headquarters, I think it's the same one, I'm not sure, but it is now, he rearranged and he put the toilets in different places, the restaurant areas in different places, so people had more opportunity to pass each other in the corridor and talk. And he found that some of the best ideas just came out of a chance meeting in the corridor. They were going to the bathroom or the restaurant or whatever. And I think, again, there's a lot of forward thinking in that you've got to have something outside the norm to create a crack, if you like, for the we to come through the I, for the great ideas to come through.
It's like Leonard Cohen says, you know, there's a crack in everything to let in the light.
Right.
I just love that line. But, you know, it's like what you're saying about designing the buildings is very interesting, because we have had architects who come along, have taken the 7 levels of consciousness model and realized that they can actually design a building based on those requirements, where they do have spaces for all of the to facilitate every aspect of consciousness. I thought that, when I heard about that, I thought that was brilliant.
Yes. And does things like Feng Shui come into this at all?
I'm sure it does. I'm a great believer in that. It doesn't actually, we don't actually work with Feng Shui in any way, shape or form. But for me, what you're talking about is the link between beauty and alignment.
Yes.
Beauty and energetic alignment. And that, again, is a level 6 concept. It's an appreciation for the natural order of things. And that's what Feng Shui is really about. Putting things into a natural order. And that, again, comes with this deepening of awareness and the expansion of consciousness to recognize that it's important to work with everybody around you in an open way, which you described earlier.
Yeah, it's about this thing, and I think we talked about it at the beginning of the interview. It's about getting out of the way, isn't it?
Yeah.
Somehow.
Letting go. I call it letting go.
Yeah.
You know, in the last 6 or 7 years of my life, I've pretty much let go of nearly everything. You know, unfortunately, I had to let go of my marriage. Then my company was doing well. I realized I had to let go and stop being the CEO and move on to be founder chairman, if you like. I realized a couple of years ago that I didn't need to be in America. I'd been in America for 24 years. I needed to be in Europe, so I have to let go of my home in America. And then I was called back to be in England simply because my mum, who was 98, had moved into a home, and I realized that she needed me. And so I came back to England for over a year just to be next to her during the last part of her life. And she died in August last year, 100 years old and 15 days. And,
wow.
and I realized that actually just being there for her during that last year lifted me to a whole new level of consciousness, because I really understood what compassion was about. I really understood what letting go of everything in my life was about, so I could be there for one other person. And that lesson has stayed with me, because ultimately it's about letting go of what your ego is desiring, wanting, and at the same time opening yourself up to what your soul wants to bring through you. And so as you let go, let go, let go, you move into that space of the void, that space where the ego doesn't have any needs anymore, but can be where, what I say is where the beliefs of the ego blend with the values of the soul, and then you allow that to be your journey.
Yes, well, it is amazing probably that we are all living in a void, and we're all actually trying to fill up this space.
We're filling it up with stuff. That's what consumerism is about. Is that filling the void with stuff?
And the way
and tittle tattle and gossip.
But the way most businesses make a living is making stuff to fill the void up.
It is. But then you have to ask yourself also, so how can businesses then think about, you know, the stuff that they're producing and do it in a way which is sustainable for the planet?
Yes, and sustainable for their own business as well.
And sustainable for their own business. See, you know, when you look at the patterns at the different levels of existence, I'm talking about the atomic, the cellular, and the Homo sapiens, you see parallels, you know, so I'm saying this because I want to just say one word on sustainability. You see, the human body is able to maintain itself at the right temperatures and blood circulations and et cetera, through a process called homeostasis. It's well known, it's well measured. Well, actually, everything does that. And what sustainability is for me is really homeostasis at the level of humanity. How can we live within the confines of our needs so that we can maintain existence of the human species? It's homeostasis at the level of humanity. And I think if people could understand that, that may give them another perspective on what sustainability is about.
We have to finish in about 2 minutes, but this is a hugely interesting for me and also very important topic, and it is the bringing together, isn't it? The true bringing together, consciousness and sustainability,
right,
and living lives as human beings.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mention your books again.
Okay, thank you.
The one we've talked most about is the New Leadership Paradigm, which I really recommend. I've rarely read a book that has so many different levels in there, bringing together business and consciousness in a very deep way, in a very practical way. I really recommend this. And your other books, Building a Values-Driven Organisation, Liberating the Corporate Soul, and then your first book was Spiritual Unfoldment, A Guide to Liberating Your Soul. So there's been kind of sequence the way
absolutely
the books have evolved too.
In fact, that first book is actually just called A Guide to Liberating Your Soul. But
yes.
What is interesting about that, I published it in 1994, I wrote it in 92, 93. What is so interesting to me is that when I look back at that book, there's so little I would change now. It was almost like a blueprint for my own growth and development. And I think that's pretty interesting.
It is indeed. It's been fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. I've loved your energy and your passion for the subject, and I think it's been a good program, great program.
Thank you.
And thank you everybody for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you all again soon. Goodbye.